A virgin billionaire lived alone for 30 years until a poor 18-year-old collapsed at his door. For decades he locked himself away from the world, trapped in silence, haunted by the woman he lost. But when a starving girl in a torn dress falls onto his doorstep in the middle of a raging storm, everything changes. He lets her in, just for one night. But the way she looks at him, the way she hums a song he hasn't heard since his fiancée died, it shakes something deep inside him. Who is she really? And why does she know a secret no stranger should ever know? As whispers spread through town, calling him a monster and her a liar, he must face a truth that's been buried for decades. Because this meeting wasn't an accident, it was destiny knocking. But when the world turns against them, can saving her finally save him, or destroy them both? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The waves crashed against the rocky Maine coast with thunderous force as the November nor'easter raged. Inside his vast glass mansion, perched on the cliffs, Nathan Warren stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, watching nature's fury unfold. The wind howled through the empty rooms like a mournful song, reminding him of quieter evenings from decades past. At 52 years old, Nathan's face bore the distinguished lines of time, his dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples. His tall frame remained lean and strong from his daily walks along the shore, though his shoulders carried an invisible weight that no amount of exercise could lift. The house around him gleamed with pristine perfection, every surface polished, every item in its designated place. It was less a home than a carefully curated museum of solitude. He moved away from the window to settle into his leather armchair by the fireplace, where flames danced behind the glass screen. On the side table lay a stack of old letters, their edges softened by years of handling. Nathan picked up the topmost envelope, running his fingers over the familiar handwriting. Lydia's handwriting. My dearest Nathan. The letter began, as it had 1,000 times before. He didn't need to read further. Every word was etched in his memory. 30 years had passed since Lydia's death, yet some days the loss felt as fresh as yesterday. The tech empire he'd built afterward had been both escape and penance, a way to fill the void she'd left behind. But eventually, even that hadn't been enough, and he'd retreated here, to this glass fortress by the sea. The wind suddenly gusted harder, rattling the windows with its force. Nathan glanced up from the letter, his thoughts interrupted by the storm's increasing intensity. The weather forecast had predicted one of the worst nor'easters in recent memory, and it was living up to expectations. Rain lashed against the glass in sheets, while lightning periodically illuminated the churning ocean below. His evening routine rarely varied. Walk the shore in the morning, manage his investments remotely during the day, read Lydia's letters by night. The housekeeper came twice a week to maintain the immaculate order he required, but otherwise, Nathan spent his days in complete solitude. It was easier this way, safer. The world beyond his property line held too many reminders, too many possibilities for pain. A particularly bright flash of lightning lit up the night sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. Nathan rose from his chair, drawn back to the windows by nature's display. The rain was coming down in nearly horizontal sheets now, driven by the powerful coastal winds. Then, almost lost in the storm's fury, he heard it, a sound so unexpected in his sanctuary that at first he thought he must have imagined it. But there it was again, a faint knocking at his front door. Nathan stood frozen, listening intently. Who would be out in weather like this? His private road was gated, the property secured. Yet the knocking came again, weaker this time, but unmistakable. Something in that feeble sound spurred him to action. He strode quickly through the house, his footsteps echoing off marble floors and glass walls. The knocking had stopped by the time he reached the front door, but some instinct told him to open it anyway. The sight that greeted him stole his breath. A young woman lay crumpled on his doorstep, her body curled against the storm. She wore only a thin sundress, now soaked through and clinging to her slight frame. Her feet were bare, scraped and bleeding, and her dark hair was plastered to her face by the rain. She wasn't moving. Nathan didn't hesitate. Years of self-imposed isolation fell away in that moment as basic human compassion took over. He stepped out into the storm and carefully gathered the unconscious woman into his arms. She was alarmingly light, her skin cold as ice against his. Water dripped from her dress, forming puddles on his pristine floor as he carried her inside. But for once, Nathan didn't care about the imperfection. He bore her swiftly to the nearest guest room, one that hadn't seen use in decades. Laying her gently on the bed, he quickly assessed her condition. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her pulse weak but present. Her skin was dangerously cold, and she was shivering violently. Nathan rushed to the ensuite bathroom, gathering every towel he could find. As he began to dry her hair and arms, working carefully to warm her, his mind raced with questions. Who was she? How had she ended up at his door on such a night? What circumstances could have led her here, barefoot and barely dressed in November? The young woman stirred slightly under his ministrations, a small moan escaping her lips, but she didn't fully regain consciousness. Nathan knew she needed dry clothes, but the thought made him uncomfortable. He settled for wrapping her in several thick blankets, trying to trap what little body heat she had left. Standing back, he studied her face in the soft lamplight. There was something hauntingly familiar about her features, something that tugged at the edges of his memory, though he couldn't quite place it. She couldn't have been more than 25 years old, barely more than a girl, really. Nathan pulled out his phone, ready to call for emergency services, but paused. The storm was at its peak now, and his property was notoriously difficult to reach even in good weather. The rational thing would be to call anyway, but something made him hesitate. She seemed stable, if cold, and the nearest hospital was over an hour away in these conditions. He decided to wait until she regained consciousness, monitoring her closely in the meantime. Moving quietly around the room, he adjusted the thermostat higher and found an extra blanket in the closet. The storm continued to rage outside, but in here it was warm and still. Nathan settled into an armchair near the bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets. For the first time in 30 years, his evening routine had been disrupted. For the first time in 30 years, he wasn't alone with his memories and Lydia's letters. The young woman slept on, unaware of how her presence had already begun to crack the careful walls of Nathan's solitude. Outside, the nor'easter howled across the cliffs, but inside the glass mansion, something long frozen had begun to thaw. Thunder rolled across the sky, and Nathan found himself doing something he hadn't done in decades, praying. Not the formal prayers of his youth, but a simple, wordless plea for this stranger's recovery. As he watched over her, the storm raged on, marking the beginning of a night that would change everything. Nathan carried the unconscious young woman through his vast living room, her wet clothes leaving dark trails on the polished marble floor. The space felt different somehow, less pristine, more alive, as he gently laid her on the Italian leather couch. Lightning flashed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, briefly illuminating her pale face. He retrieved a thick wool blanket from the hall closet, one that hadn't seen use in years, and carefully draped it over her slight frame. Her shivering had lessened, but her skin remained cold to the touch. Another flash of lightning lit up the room, followed by a deep rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. The girl stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Nathan leaned closer, concerned. Her lips moved, barely a whisper. "Hope," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Hope Lawson." Her eyes opened briefly, revealing deep brown irises clouded with confusion and fear, before rolling back as she slipped into unconsciousness once again. "Hope," Nathan repeated softly, testing the name. It seemed fitting somehow, this lost girl appearing on his doorstep like a message he couldn't quite decipher. He made his way to the kitchen, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. The familiar ritual of preparing tea gave his hands something to do, while his mind churned with questions. As he waited for the water to boil, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. Mrs. Ruth Givens answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Mr. Warren, is everything all right? I need you to come to the main house," Nathan said, keeping his voice steady. "There's been an incident. At this hour, in this weather." He could hear rustling on the other end as she presumably got out of bed. "What kind of incident?" "A young woman collapsed on my doorstep. She's alive but weak. I've brought her inside." There was a long pause. "You brought a stranger into the house?" The disapproval in Mrs. Givens' voice was clear. "Mr. Warren, we can't have stray girls just—" She was unconscious and freezing. Nathan cut in, surprising himself with the firmness in his tone. "I couldn't leave her out there to die." He heard Mrs. Givens sigh. "No, I suppose you couldn't. I'll be there in 10 minutes. While waiting for Mrs. Givens, Nathan returned to the living room with a cup of hot tea. Hope hadn't moved, but her breathing seemed stronger now. The wool blanket rose and fell with each breath, a rhythm that somehow made the room feel less empty. The sound of the service entrance door opening announced Mrs. Givens' arrival. She appeared in the doorway, her grey hair hastily pinned up, wearing a rain jacket over her nightgown. Her eyes went straight to the figure on the couch. "Lord have mercy," she muttered, moving closer to examine Hope. "She's just a child. She said her name is Hope Lawson before she fainted again." Nathan explained. "That's all I know." Mrs. Givens pressed her hand against Hope's forehead. "Well, she's warming up at least, but these wet clothes need to come off before she catches her death." She turned to Nathan. "I'll take care of that. You go make yourself useful somewhere else." Nathan nodded, grateful for the older woman's practical efficiency. He retreated to his study, but found himself unable to focus on work. Instead, he stood at the window, watching the storm rage against the cliffs below. The night passed slowly. Mrs. Givens changed Hope into dry clothes, borrowed from her own closet, and stayed by her side while Nathan paced the house, too unsettled to sleep. As dawn approached, the storm began to fade, leaving behind a grey, wet world. It was early morning when Hope finally woke properly. Nathan heard her voice from the living room, soft and uncertain, speaking with Mrs. Givens. When he entered, she was sitting up, wrapped in a fresh blanket, her dark hair now dry and falling in waves around her face. She looked up as he approached, and Nathan was struck by the mix of embarrassment and dignity in her expression. Despite her circumstances, she held herself with a quiet grace that seemed beyond her years. "Mr. Warren," she said, her voice stronger now. "I can't thank you enough for helping me last night. I'm so sorry for imposing like this." "There's nothing to apologize for," Nathan replied, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "What happened? How did you end up here?" Hope's cheeks flushed slightly. "My car broke down about 3 miles back on the coastal road. I thought I could walk to town, but I underestimated the weather and the distance. Everything started getting fuzzy, and then I saw your lights." She trailed off, looking down at her hands. "I don't usually... I'm not in the habit of collapsing on strangers' doorsteps." Mrs. Givens snorted softly. "Well, you picked the right doorstep at least, though you gave us quite a scare, young lady." "You need to eat something," Nathan said suddenly, recognizing the drawn look on her face. "Mrs. Givens, could you—" "Already ahead of you," the housekeeper interrupted, heading toward the kitchen. "A proper breakfast is what's needed here." Hope tried to protest, but Nathan held up his hand. "Please, I insist. You need to regain your strength before deciding your next step." Shortly after, they found themselves in the formal dining room. Nathan couldn't remember the last time he'd used it. He usually ate in his study or kitchen. The long mahogany table, set for 10 but used by 1, seemed to emphasize the emptiness of his life in a way he usually managed to ignore. Mrs. Givens brought out a feast: eggs, bacon, fresh bread, fruit, and steaming coffee. Hope's eyes widened at the spread, but what caught Nathan's attention was the way she looked at the empty chairs, then back at him. "No one deserves to eat alone," she said quietly, almost to herself. The simple statement hit Nathan like a physical force. He looked at this young woman, who had nothing, who had nearly frozen to death, who was dependent on his charity, and saw not pity in her eyes, but genuine compassion. For the first time in years, Nathan sat down at his dining table with company. The sound of silverware on china mixed with the soft murmur of conversation as Hope told them more about herself. She spoke simply but warmly, and Nathan found himself drawn into the conversation, despite his usual reticence. Mrs. Givens bustled around them, refilling coffee cups and adding more toast to the table, but Nathan caught the satisfied look in her eyes. Something had shifted in the great glass house on the cliff. Something that had been frozen for 30 years was beginning to thaw. After the breakfast plates were cleared, Nathan stood at the window, watching the storm's aftermath. The nor'easter had left behind a pristine blanket of white, transforming the rugged Maine coastline into something ethereal. The morning sun struggled to break through heavy clouds, casting a pearl-grey light across the snow-covered landscape. "The roads should be clear in a few hours," he said, turning to Hope, who sat curled in an armchair, her borrowed sweater pulled tight around her shoulders. "I can drive you into town, then." "You've already done so much," Hope protested. "I couldn't ask for anything more." "It's not asking if I'm offering," Nathan replied, his tone gentle but firm. When they stepped outside later that morning to assess the situation, the bitter cold hit them like a physical force. Hope's breath caught in her throat as she saw her old car, barely visible beneath a massive drift of snow that had accumulated during the storm. The rusty compact vehicle looked pitiful, half buried in white. "I can walk from here," Hope insisted, wrapping her arms around herself. "Really, it's not that far." Nathan turned to her, his expression stern yet kind. "It's 15 miles to town in this weather. You'd freeze to death before making it halfway." He gestured to the treacherous conditions. The temperature's still dropping, and another system's moving in. Walking isn't an option. Hope bit her lip, clearly torn between pride and practicality. "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly. "You're not," Nathan assured her. His voice carried a authority that brooked no argument. "There's plenty of room upstairs. Stay until the weather improves and we can get your car sorted out." After a moment's hesitation, Hope nodded. Relief flickered across Nathan's features so quickly she almost missed it. Mrs. Givens showed Hope to one of the guest rooms, a spacious chamber with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. The room was immaculate, like everything else in the house. but had a sterile quality that suggested it hadn't seen use in years. The bed was made with crisp white linens, and heavy drapes hung perfectly straight on either side of the windows. "Thank you," Hope said sincerely, as Mrs. Givens supplied her with fresh towels and basic toiletries. "This is overwhelming." The housekeeper's expression softened. "Make yourself at home, dear. God knows this place could use some life in it." Left alone, Hope spent the afternoon exploring the mansion. Her footsteps echoed through empty corridors lined with expensive art. Every surface gleamed, every object sat in perfect alignment. Yet the overall effect was more museum than home. The house felt preserved rather than lived in. The view, however, took her breath away. From every window, the Atlantic stretched endlessly towards the horizon, its steel-grey waters churning against the rocky shore below. Snow continued to fall in lazy spirals, adding to the dreamlike quality of the scene. It was late afternoon when Hope discovered the music room. Sunlight slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. In the center stood a magnificent grand piano, its black surface reflecting the cold winter light. Like everything else, it was spotless, almost too perfect. Hope approached it, reverently, running her fingers along the smooth wood. Dust had settled on the keys, despite the house's otherwise pristine condition. Without thinking, she began gently wiping them clean with the sleeve of her borrowed sweater, humming softly as she worked. The melody came naturally to her lips, an old hymn her mother used to sing when Hope was very young, before everything fell apart. The simple tune filled the silent room with unexpected warmth. "Where did you learn that song?" Hope startled at Nathan's voice behind her. He stood in the doorway, his face ashen, as if he'd seen a ghost. There was something raw and vulnerable in his expression that made her heart ache. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, stepping back from the piano. "I shouldn't have touched it without permission." "The song," Nathan repeated, his voice rough. "Where did you hear it?" Hope hesitated, noting the intensity in his gaze. "My mum used to sing it," she said softly, looking away. "When I was little." The memory brought a familiar pang of loss, and she wrapped her arms around herself protectively. Nathan said nothing more, but his hands trembled slightly as he turned and walked away. The sound of his footsteps faded down the corridor, leaving Hope alone with the ghost of the melody still hanging in the air. That night, sleep eluded Nathan completely. He sat in his study, a glass of untouched scotch on the desk beside him, listening to the wind howl outside. But it wasn't the storm keeping him awake. It was the echo of that hymn playing over and over in his mind. He hadn't heard that melody in 30 years, not since Lydia used to play it on Sunday mornings, her voice clear and sweet as she sang about amazing grace. The piano had stood silent since her death, untouched and gathering dust, despite Mrs. Givens's best efforts to keep the rest of the house immaculate. Now those notes haunted him again, brought back to life by a strange girl's gentle humming. The coincidence felt too precise to be random, yet how could it be anything else? His rational mind rejected the notion of divine intervention, but something deeper, something he'd buried long ago, stirred uneasily in his chest. Hour after hour passed as Nathan sat in darkness, watching snow fall beyond the windows, while that simple melody wound its way through his memories, refusing to let him rest. By dawn, he still hadn't closed his eyes, and the hymn continued to echo in his mind like a long-forgotten promise finally remembered. The morning sun pierced through frost-glazed windows, casting prismatic patterns across the mansion's polished floors. Hope stood in Nathan's vast kitchen, wearing a borrowed sweater and slacks from Mrs. Givens that were slightly too large for her slender frame. She had rolled up the sleeves, determined to make herself useful. The kitchen, despite its professional-grade appliances and gleaming surfaces, had the unlived-in feel of a showroom. Hope opened cupboards carefully, searching for basic ingredients while trying not to disturb the perfect order of things. "Third cabinet on the left." Mrs. Given's voice startled her. "That's where I keep the pancake mix." "Oh, thank you." Hope smiled warmly. "I hope you don't mind me using the kitchen. I wanted to do something to show my appreciation." Mrs. Givens crossed her arms, but her stern expression softened slightly. "Well, at least someone's finally putting it to proper use. This kitchen hasn't seen real cooking in years, just my basic meals for Mr. Warren." Hope measured ingredients carefully, warming to the task. "These are beautiful pans," she commented, running her hand along a copper-bottomed skillet. "My foster mum had one like this. She taught me how to season it properly." "Foster mum?" Mrs. Givens raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued despite her usual reserve. "Yes, ma'am. I had a few of them over the years. The last one taught me to cook." Hope poured batter onto the hot griddle, the familiar action bringing comfort. She said everyone should know how to make something that makes people smile. From the doorway, Nathan watched the scene unfold, unseen by either woman. The sight of someone cooking in his kitchen, the smell of butter and vanilla, the quiet domestic sounds, stirred something long dormant in his chest. Hope moved with careful grace, as if afraid of taking up too much space, yet there was a natural warmth to her presence that seemed to fill the room. When she noticed him, Hope's cheeks flushed slightly. "I hope you like pancakes, Mr. Warren. It's the least I can do to thank you for your kindness." "Nathan," he corrected automatically, surprising himself. "Please, call me Nathan." The three of them sat at the breakfast bar, another first. Nathan couldn't remember the last time anyone had cooked for him, besides Mrs. Givens's practical meals. The pancakes were light, golden, and perfectly done. "These are wonderful," he said quietly, meaning it. "They're not half bad." Mrs. Givens agreed, her gruff tone belying the way she'd already started on her second helping. "Though you've made quite a mess of my organized kitchen. I'll clean everything up, I promise." Hope assured her quickly. "Thank you for letting me use your utensils. They're clearly well cared for." Mrs. Givens' expression softened further. "Well, at least you know how to treat good cookware, unlike some people who've worked here before." After breakfast, Nathan insisted on driving Hope into town to check on her car. The morning was crisp and clear, the storm's fury replaced by crystalline beauty. Snow blanketed the landscape, transforming the rugged Maine coastline into something from a fairy tale. Hope sat quietly in the passenger seat of Nathan's luxury SUV, her hands folded in her lap. He noticed she had a habit of making herself smaller, as if trying not to impose. It struck him as both endearing and sad. The local mechanics shop was a weathered building that had served the coastal community for generations. Inside, the smell of oil and rubber mingled with the ever-present scent of the sea. Tom Miller, the owner, wiped his hands on a rag as he delivered the news. "It's not good, miss," he said, shaking his head. "Your timing belt's shot, and there's serious transmission trouble. Parts'll have to come from away. Looking at least a week, maybe 2, depending on shipping." Hope's face fell, though she tried to hide it. "Oh, I see. Could you give me an estimate for the repairs?" When Tom named the figure, Nathan saw her shoulders slump slightly. He knew that look, the careful calculation of someone trying to stretch limited resources. "We'll deal with that later," Nathan said firmly. "The important thing is getting it fixed properly." The drive back to the mansion was quiet, but Nathan could sense Hope's anxiety. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I have a proposition for you." She turned to look at him, wariness and hope mingling in her expression. "The house could use some help," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Givens isn't as young as she used to be, though don't tell her I said that. If you'd like to earn your keep while your car is being repaired, there's plenty of work to be done." The relief that flooded Hope's face was immediate and touching. "Really, I'd be happy to help in any way I can. I'm a hard worker, I promise." "I don't doubt that," Nathan replied softly. That evening, they shared another meal together. Mrs. Givens had prepared a pot roast, and Hope had insisted on helping with the vegetables. The dining room felt different somehow, less like a mausoleum and more like a proper room. "Tell me about yourself," Nathan found himself saying, surprising them both. "You mentioned wanting to become a nurse." Hope nodded, carefully setting down her fork. "Yes, I've always wanted to help people. I've been taking pre-nursing classes at the community college, working my way through slowly." She paused, then added quietly, "My mother was sick a lot when I was very young, before she left. I guess I wanted to understand, to learn how to make things better." "She left?" Nathan asked gently. "When I was 7. Hope confirmed, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. "My father was never in the picture. After that, it was foster homes until I aged out of the system at 18. "And yet you still want to help others," Nathan observed. Hope looked up at him, her expression earnest. "Everyone deserves kindness, like what you've shown me, treating me like a person, not just someone who needed help. That means more than you know." Nathan felt something shift inside him, like ice breaking up after a long winter. This young woman, who had every reason to be bitter, was instead full of grace and gratitude. Her resilience both humbled and moved him. Mrs. Givens, who had been quietly observing from her seat, caught Nathan's eye. Her expression seemed to say, "Now you're beginning to understand." The evening stretched on, comfortable in a way Nathan had forgotten life could be. For the first time in decades, he felt truly present in a conversation, truly connected to another human being. Hope's simple presence had somehow breached walls he'd thought impenetrable, bringing warmth back into spaces long gone cold. As they finished their meal, Nathan realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd talked this much or listened this intently. Something was changing in his carefully ordered world, and for once, the thought didn't terrify him. The days flowed together like gentle waves on the shore, each one bringing subtle changes to the mansion's atmosphere. Hope moved through the grand spaces with quiet purpose, her presence slowly transforming the cold sterility into something warmer, more alive. In the kitchen, she worked alongside Mrs. Givens, who had gradually warmed to the young woman's earnest ways. Together they prepared meals that filled the house with forgotten aromas, fresh bread, simmering soups, and apple pies that made even Nathan venture out of his study to investigate. "My grandmother taught me to bake," Hope explained one morning, kneading dough with practiced hands. "In one of my better foster homes, she said working with dough was good for the soul." Nathan found himself lingering in these moments, drawn to the simple domestic peace he'd denied himself for so long. He watched as Hope breathed life back into corners of his home he'd abandoned to dust and memory. One particularly productive morning, Hope discovered a collection of garden journals in the library. The leather-bound volumes were filled with detailed notes about plants and seasons, sketches of landscape designs, and pressed flowers from years past. "These are beautiful," she said, carefully turning the fragile pages. "Did you keep these?" Nathan shook his head. "Lydia did. She loved the gardens." His voice held the familiar edge of pain, but it wasn't as sharp as before. Hope took it upon herself to organize the journals, treating them with reverence as she arranged them chronologically on the shelves. She spent hours reading through them, sometimes making notes of her own about which plants might still thrive in the neglected beds outside. The snow fell steadily that afternoon, blanketing the cliffs in white silence. Hope had wandered into Nathan's study, drawn by the wall of books and the warm firelight. The room smelled of leather and wood polish, and late afternoon sun filtered through the falling snow outside the windows. That's when she saw it, the framed newspaper clipping hanging between two bookshelves. A younger Nathan smiled at the camera, his arm around a beautiful woman with light hair and gentle eyes. The headline read, "Tech Pioneer Warren Announces Engagement to Local Teacher." Hope stepped closer, her heart suddenly pounding. The woman in the photo, Lydia Carter, she assumed, looked so familiar it made her dizzy. The shape of her face, the curve of her smile, the way she held herself. "That's impossible," she whispered, reaching out to touch the glass. Nathan entered the study then, carrying 2 cups of tea. He stopped short when he saw Hope standing before the photo, her hand trembling against the frame. "That woman!" Hope's voice was barely audible. "She looks exactly like my mum." Nathan set the cups down with a clatter. His face had gone pale. "What did you say?" "My mother, Laura Lawson. This could be her twin." Nathan moved as if in a dream, crossing to an old oak cabinet. His hands shook as he withdrew a leather photo album. "Laura Lawson," he repeated, his voice rough. "Lydia's twin sister." Hope sank into a nearby chair as Nathan opened the album. There they were, 2 identical young women, arms around each other, laughing at the camera. The inscription beneath read, "Lydia and Laura, Spring 1992. "I never knew," Hope whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Mom never talked about her family. She struggled with addiction. After my father left, things got worse. Then one day, when I was 7, she just disappeared." Her voice caught. "I went into foster care. Never heard from her again." Nathan stood very still, staring at the photos. "Laura was different after Lydia died, wild with grief. She couldn't bear to be around any of us who reminded her of her sister. She left town, and we never—" He looked at Hope with new understanding. "We never knew she had a daughter." Hope wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Did you know her well?" "My mother?" "I did. She was going to be my sister-in-law. She and Lydia were inseparable growing up. They even had their own secret language." He paused, his expression distant. "The last time I saw Laura was at Lydia's funeral. She was broken. We all were." Hope traced her finger over the photograph of the smiling twins. "What was Lydia like?" Nathan's voice softened. "She was a teacher. Kindergarten. She had this way of finding good in everything, even on the darkest days. She loved gardens and music and—" He stopped, remembering something. "The hymn you were humming at the piano. Lydia and Laura used to sing it together." "Mum taught it to me when I was little," Hope said quietly. "It's one of the only things I remember clearly about her." Nathan sat heavily in his leather chair, the photo album open on his lap. "The day of the accident, the last thing Lydia said to me was, 'Promise me you'll take care of her if anything happens.'" His eyes met Hope's. "I always thought she meant Laura. But maybe—" The snow continued to fall outside, muffling the world in white silence. Hope sat with her hands clasped in her lap, processing this connection to a past she'd never known existed. Nathan watched her, seeing echoes of both sisters in her face, Laura's vulnerability and Lydia's quiet strength. Later that night, after Hope had gone to bed, Nathan sat alone by the fire. The Habs photo album lay open beside him, memories spilling from its pages like ghosts. He thought about promises and destiny, about grief and healing, about the mysterious ways life brings things full circle. The firelight flickered over Lydia's smile in the photographs. For the first time in years, looking at her image didn't feel like drowning in sorrow. Instead, he felt something different, a sense of purpose, as if all the years of isolation had been leading to this moment, this chance to fulfill a promise he hadn't even known he'd made. The morning sun crept through the frost-etched windows of the mansion, finding its way into corners long left dark. Hope stood in the grand living room, her hands on her hips as she surveyed the heavy velvet curtains that had kept the space in perpetual twilight. With determination in her step, she crossed to the nearest window and grasped the thick fabric. "These haven't been opened in years," Mrs. Givens commented from the doorway, watching as Hope tugged at the stubborn drapes. "Mr. Warren prefers them closed." "Well," Hope said, giving another pull, "maybe it's time to let some light in." The curtains finally gave way with a shower of dust, sending Hope into a fit of sneezing, but flooding the room with golden morning light. She smiled at the way it caught the crystal chandelier, sending rainbow prisms dancing across the walls. Over the next few days, Hope moved through the mansion like a gentle breeze, opening curtains, wiping away dust, and bringing warmth to spaces that had grown cold with neglect. She found candles in a forgotten cabinet and placed them strategically around the house, lighting them in the evenings until the rooms glowed with soft warmth. Nathan noticed the changes but found himself unable to object. The first morning he walked into his study to find sunlight streaming through the newly exposed windows, he started to protest. But then he saw how it illuminated the rich wood of his desk, the leather of his books, the gleam of the brass lamp. It was like seeing the room for the first time in years. Music began to fill the house, too. Hope had discovered an old radio in the kitchen, and soon gentle melodies drifted through the halls as she worked. Nathan, who had grown accustomed to silence, initially tensed at the intrusion. But gradually he found himself pausing in doorways, listening to Hope's quiet humming as she dusted shelves or arranged flowers she'd picked from the winter garden. Breakfast became a ritual neither of them had known they needed. Hope would wake early, helping Mrs. Givens prepare coffee and toast, sometimes adding scrambled eggs or fresh fruit. Nathan, who had taken his morning meals alone in his study for decades, found himself drawn to the kitchen by the sounds of quiet conversation and the aroma of brewing coffee. "You don't have to join us," Hope said the first morning he appeared in the doorway, looking uncertain. "I know," he replied, but sat down anyway. Mrs. Givens watched them from her spot by the stove, her usual stern expression softening as she observed their morning routine develop. Hope would pour Nathan's coffee exactly how he liked it, black, with just a whisper of sugar, and he would pass her the newspaper sections she enjoyed. Their conversation started hesitantly, but grew more natural with each passing day. "I haven't seen the old man smile like that in years," Mrs. Givens remarked to Hope one afternoon as they folded laundry. "It's like watching ice thaw in spring." Hope blushed, smoothing a pillowcase with careful hands. "He just needed someone to talk to, I think. Someone to remember with." And remember they did. In the evenings, as darkness fell early and the wind howled outside, Hope would ask Nathan about Lydia. At first his answers were brief, guarded, but gradually, like a flower opening to the sun, he began to share more. "She loved teaching kindergarten," he told Hope one evening as they sat in the study. "She said there was nothing more magical than watching a child learn to read, the way their faces would light up when they understood a word for the first time." "What else?" Hope asked softly, curled in an armchair with a cup of tea. Nathan's eyes grew distant, but his smile remained. "She had this laugh. It could fill a room. And she never met a stranger. Everyone was just a friend she hadn't talked to yet. She loved gardenias and chocolate cake and singing in the church choir. Did you sing with her? God, no. Nathan chuckled. I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but I loved watching her sing. She glowed from within when she sang. One crisp afternoon, Nathan found Hope standing at the French doors leading to the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore. Without thinking, he said, "Would you like to walk down there?" Hope's face lit up. Really? I'd love to. They bundled up against the December chill and made their way down the winding path to the beach. Hope immediately began collecting sea glass, exclaiming over each frosted piece she found. Look at this one, she said, holding up a piece of deep blue glass. Isn't it amazing how something broken can become something beautiful? Nathan watched her carefully place each piece in her pocket. What will you do with them? I'm not sure yet, she admitted. But I believe everything has a purpose, even if we don't know what it is right away. She paused, looking out over the grey waves. You know, I think God sends people into our lives when we need them most. Sometimes we don't even know we needed them until they're there. Nathan felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope's simple faith, so like Lydia's, touched a part of his heart he thought had died long ago. That evening, they shared a quiet dinner by the fireplace. Mrs. Givens had outdone herself with a pot roast and fresh bread, but it was the companionship that made the meal special. The fire crackled softly, casting warm shadows on the walls, and Nathan realized he felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years. Peace. Hope sat cross-legged on the hearth rug, her plate balanced on her knee. The firelight caught the copper highlights in her hair, and for a moment Nathan saw Lydia in her profile. But the ache that usually accompanied such moments was different now, gentler, more bittersweet than painful. Thank you, he said suddenly. Hope looked up, surprised. For what? For bringing life back into this house, for making me remember that remembering doesn't have to hurt. She smiled, that same radiant smile that seemed to light up every room she entered. Thank you for letting me stay, for sharing your memories, for making me feel like I belong somewhere. The fire popped and settled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the winter wind whistled around the corners of the mansion, but inside, warmth and contentment reigned. Two lonely souls had found an unexpected sanctuary in each other's company, healing old wounds neither had known how to tend alone. Mrs. Givens appeared in the doorway with dessert, apple pie still warm from the oven, and shook her head fondly at the sight of them. The stern housekeeper had seen the changes in both Nathan and the house over the past week, and though she'd never admit it out loud, her heart was glad. The mansion felt like a home again, and its master was finally emerging from his long winter of grief. The late December morning started like any other. Hope was helping Mrs. Givens bring in groceries while Nathan cleared snow from the driveway. The delivery truck pulled up right on schedule, bringing their weekly supplies. What they didn't notice was the driver lingering a moment too long, phone raised discreetly as Hope ran out to help Nathan with a particularly heavy box. She had slipped on the icy path, and Nathan caught her arm, both of them dissolving into laughter at her clumsiness. Click. 3 days later, the photo exploded across social media. The headline blazed across screens. Virgin billionaire living with teen girl. The image showed Hope, her face bright with laughter, Nathan's hand on her arm, the mansion looming behind them like a glass castle. Out of context, their innocent moment had been twisted into something dark. The first news van arrived before dawn. Nathan woke to the sound of gravel crunching under heavy tires. By breakfast, there were 5 more. Reporters pressed against the security gates, shouting questions through the bars. "Mr. Warren, is it true you're harboring a runaway? How long has she been living here? What's the nature of your relationship?" Hope stood at the window, her face pale as she watched more vehicles arrive. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This is all my fault." Nathan's jaw tightened as he watched another news van park. No, this is what they do. They take something pure and make it ugly because ugly sells. Mrs. Givens huffed as she drew the curtains. "Vultures, the lot of them. Don't you pay them any mind, girl." But the calls started coming. Nathan's board of directors demanded an emergency meeting. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from his lawyers, his PR team, his business partners. "Nathan," his lead counsel said gravely over the speakerphone, "this could seriously impact the company's reputation. We need to get ahead of this story." "There is no story." Nathan snapped. "She's Lydia's niece. She needed help. That's all there is to it. The public won't see it that way. They'll assume, I don't care what they assume." Hope tried to maintain her normal routine, but the constant presence of cameras made her feel like a prisoner. When they needed groceries, Nathan insisted on sending Mrs. Givens alone, but Hope wouldn't hear of it. "I won't hide," she said firmly. "I haven't done anything wrong." They drove into town together, Hope holding her head high despite the stares. In the grocery store, she could feel the whispers following her down every aisle. "Gold digger," someone muttered. "Probably threw herself at him. Poor man, being taken advantage of." Hope's hands trembled as she reached for a can of soup. Two middle-aged women stood nearby, not bothering to lower their voices. "Just like her mother." One said, "Laura was always after rich men, too. At least Laura had the decency to leave town. This one's shameless." The can slipped from Hope's fingers, clattering to the floor. Tears burning in her eyes, she fled the store, ignoring Nathan calling after her. She ran until her lungs ached, finally stopping at the cliffs overlooking the ocean. The winter wind whipped at her coat as she stared down at the churning waves below. This was where her mother must have stood 30 years ago, before she ran away, before she abandoned her baby daughter. Had she felt this same crushing weight of judgment? "Hope!" Nathan's voice carried over the wind. He approached carefully, his shoes crunching on the frozen grass. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "I'm sorry," she said, not turning around. "I shouldn't have run off like that." "You shouldn't have had to hear those things." He moved to stand beside her, his tall frame blocking some of the wind. "You shouldn't care what they say. They don't know who you are." Hope wiped at her eyes with her sleeve. "But I do. I'm nobody. Just another charity case. Just another Lawson woman causing trouble." "Look at me," Nathan said firmly. When she didn't move, he gently turned her to face him. "You're not nobody. You're someone now. You're the person who brought music back to my house. You're the one who made Mrs. Givens smile again. You're the girl who sees beauty in broken sea glass and goodness in a bitter old man." Hope's lower lip trembled. "But everyone thought I was crazy when I started my company. Everyone thought I was throwing my life away when I left the city. Everyone has always had opinions about how I should live my life." He squeezed her shoulders gently. "The only opinions that matter are the ones that come from people who truly know you." That evening, after Hope had gone to bed, Nathan sat in his study with a blank piece of paper before him. The cursor blinked on his laptop screen, waiting. With careful consideration, he began to type. "To the board of directors, effective immediately, I am stepping down from all public-facing roles within the company. Recent events have made it clear that my energy and attention are needed elsewhere." He worked late into the night, drafting and redrafting the letter. Outside his window, the news vans kept their vigilant watch, their presence a reminder of why this decision was necessary. But for the first time in 30 years, Nathan felt absolutely certain about his path forward. His legacy wouldn't be measured in stock prices or technological innovations. It would be measured in the light returning to a young girl's eyes, in the warmth returning to cold halls, in the fulfillment of a promise made long ago to the woman he loved. Mrs. Givens found him still at his desk as dawn approached. She placed a cup of coffee beside him without comment, but her hand rested briefly on his shoulder, a gesture of support from someone who had watched him hide from life for too long. The media circus would continue, the rumors wouldn't stop. But within the walls of the glass mansion, something stronger than scandal was growing. A family, pieced together from broken parts, stronger for having been mended. The morning after Nathan sent his resignation letter, he found Hope standing at the kitchen window, staring past the garden at something in the distance. Her shoulders were tense, probably from another night of worrying about the reporters still camped outside their gate. "What are you looking at?" he asked, joining her with his coffee. "That building back there." She pointed to a skeletal structure barely visible through decades of overgrowth. "Is that a greenhouse?" Nathan hadn't thought about the greenhouse in years. It had been Lydia's pride and joy, her sanctuary where she'd grown roses and orchids year-round. After her death, he'd locked it up and let nature reclaim it. "It was," he said softly. "It's probably beyond repair now." Hope turned to him, her eyes lighting up with that determined spark he'd come to recognize. Nothing's beyond repair if you're willing to try. That afternoon, they ventured out to investigate. The glass panels were grimy but mostly intact. Vines had crept through every crack, and rust painted the metal frame in auburn streaks. Inside, dead leaves carpeted the floor, and empty clay pots lay scattered like abandoned treasures. "It's perfect," Hope declared, already rolling up her sleeves. Nathan found himself swept along in her enthusiasm. They spent that first day just clearing a path to the door, cutting back thorny branches and pulling stubborn weeds. Hope worked tirelessly, her face smudged with dirt, but glowing with purpose. Nathan discovered muscles he'd forgotten he had. "You're going to be sore tomorrow?" Hope teased as she watched him stretch his back. "I'm sore now," he admitted, but he was smiling. Each day that followed developed its own rhythm. They'd start early before the heat built up behind the glass. Nathan taught Hope about proper soil composition, showing her how to test pH levels and mix in the right nutrients. She absorbed everything eagerly, asking questions that reminded him of his own curiosity as a young man. "Why do the orchids need special soil?" she'd ask, or "How do you know when a plant needs more light?" While they worked, stories flowed as naturally as water. Hope told him about her first job at 16, washing dishes in a diner until the owner caught her sleeping in her car and fired her for her own good. "He thought he was helping," she said, carefully repotting a rescued fern. "He said I needed to go home, but there wasn't any home to go to." Nathan shared memories too, about building his first computer in his parents' garage, about meeting Lydia at a charity auction where they both bid on the same painting and decided to share it. "We hung it in her apartment." He recalled painting a weathered bench a soft sage green. "Every other week, one of us would visit just to look at it. I think that painting was just an excuse to see each other." "Where is it now?" Hope asked. "In storage. After she died, I couldn't look at it anymore." Hope nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Maybe someday." "Maybe," he agreed. They installed new glass panels where the old ones had cracked, their hands working together to hold the delicate sheets steady. Hope picked out flowers that would bloom in different seasons: tulips for spring, dahlias for summer, chrysanthemums for fall. Nathan ordered rare orchid species, remembering how Lydia had loved their exotic beauty. The greenhouse slowly transformed. New benches lined the walls, painted in soft greens and blues. They installed modern irrigation systems and heating controls, but kept the antique potting table that Hope had lovingly restored. The air inside grew rich with the smell of damp earth and growing things. In the evenings, exhausted but satisfied, they'd sit in the kitchen eating soup that Mrs. Givens left simmering on the stove. Hope introduced Nathan to old movies she'd discovered at the library. Casablanca, It's a Wonderful Life, Roman Holiday. He found himself looking forward to these quiet hours, watching Hope mouth along with favorite dialogues she'd memorized. The mansion changed, too. Muddy boots by the door, gardening books spread across the coffee table, fresh flowers in every room. The sterile perfection that had defined his life for 30 years gave way to something messier but infinitely more alive. One morning, Nathan handed Hope an envelope. Her first paycheck. She opened it with trembling fingers, then burst into tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "It's just, I've never had a real job before, just under-the-table cash. This feels legitimate?" Nathan suggested gently. She nodded, "Like I'm a real person." Nathan felt his throat tighten. He'd forgotten this feeling. Pride in someone else's accomplishments, joy in their joy. It was how his father must have felt watching him succeed, how he imagined he might have felt watching his own child grow. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold, Hope hung a small plaque above the greenhouse door. Nathan helped her level it, their shadows stretching long across the renewed garden. "New beginnings," he read aloud. "Do you think Lydia would have liked it?" Hope asked quietly. Nathan looked at the greenhouse, gleaming in the sunset like a jewel box full of life. Through the glass he could see the orchids they'd planted, the rows of seedlings reaching for light, the careful order they'd created from chaos. "She would have loved it," he said. "She would have loved you." Hope smiled, touching the plaque once more before turning toward the house. The evening air was growing cool, and inside, another bowl of soup and another old movie waited. The reporters had finally grown bored and moved on, leaving them to their quiet revolution of small, growing things. The mansion that had been a museum to grief was changing, day by day, into something else, a home where new life could take root and flourish. Rain drummed against the study's windows, creating a soothing rhythm as Hope dusted the dark wood shelves. She loved this room best, its leather-bound books, the faint smell of pipe tobacco, and the way sunlight usually streamed through the tall windows. Today, though, grey clouds cast the space in shadow, making her work by lamplight. She hummed softly while organizing Nathan's desk, straightening papers and arranging pens. The bottom drawer stuck slightly as she pulled it open. Inside, buried beneath old folders, a yellowed envelope caught her eye. The handwriting on it made her pause. "For Nathan, if you ever find her." Hope's hands trembled as she lifted the envelope. It had never been opened, its seal still intact after all these years. Something about the handwriting seemed familiar, tugging at her memory like a half-forgotten dream. She shouldn't open it. It wasn't meant for her. But that word, her, echoed in her mind. With shaking fingers, she broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The date at the top made her breath catch. 18 years ago, just months after her birth. "Dear Nathan," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means my daughter has somehow found her way to you. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'm asking anyway." Hope sank into Nathan's leather chair, her heart pounding as she recognized the signature at the bottom. Laura Lawson, her mother. "My shame runs deeper than you know." The letter continued. "The drugs, the men, the lies. They've taken everything from me. But my greatest sin was leaving her. My beautiful baby girl, I couldn't give her the life she deserved, so I left her where someone else could. But every day since then has been torture, knowing she's out there somewhere, probably hating me. And she should. I'm writing this because I know someday she might find you. You were always the best of us, Nathan. When Lydia died, I ran away from the pain. But you stayed. You built something lasting from your grief. If my daughter ever comes to you, care for her. Not out of duty, but because I know you still have love left in you. She'll need that love more than anything else. Show her that not everyone leaves. Show her that some people stay. I'm sorry for everything, Nathan. For running away after Lydia died. For not being strong enough to face the pain. Most of all, I'm sorry for not being the mother my daughter deserved. With eternal regret and hope, Laura. The paper slipped from Hope's numb fingers. Tears blurred her vision as 18 years of questions crashed over her like waves. Her mother had known all along that someday Hope might find her way here. And Nathan had known too. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Every kind word, every gentle gesture, had it all been because of this letter? Because of a promise made to her broken mother 18 years ago? She was still sitting there, letter crumpled in her lap, when she heard Nathan's car in the driveway. His footsteps echoed in the hallway, coming closer. "Hope?" he called. "Mrs. Givens said you were in here." He appeared in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat. His eyes went from her tear-stained face to the opened envelope on the desk. All the color drained from his expression. "You knew," Hope whispered. "All this time, you knew who I was." "Hope, let me explain. Was I just an obligation?" Her voice cracked. "Some promise you had to keep?" "No, it wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" She stood up, letter clutched in her fist. "You let me think this was real, that you actually cared about me. But you were just fulfilling a duty to my mother." "Hope, please!" "You didn't take me in because you wanted to," she cried. "You did it because you had to." Nathan reached for her, but she backed away. Her whole world was crumbling, again. Every moment of belonging she'd felt in this house now seemed tainted. False. "I trusted you," she whispered. The words fell between them like stones. Before Nathan could respond, Hope pushed past him and ran upstairs. She heard him calling after her, but she couldn't bear to listen. Her heart felt like it was being torn apart. Rain pounded against the windows as she threw clothes into her backpack, the same one she'd carried the night she first arrived. Funny how life worked in circles, bringing you back to where you started. Downstairs, she heard the front door open and close. Through her window, she could see Nathan standing in the rain, staring out at the ocean. His shoulders were slumped, defeated. Hope waited until he was out of sight, then crept downstairs. The mansion felt colder now, its warmth an illusion that had shattered like glass. She paused at the door, hand on the knob, remembering all the moments that had made this place feel like home. But they hadn't been real. None of it had been real. The door slammed behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty halls. Hope ran into the rain, leaving footprints that would soon be washed away by the storm. Behind her, Nathan stood alone in the downpour, watching her disappear into the gathering darkness. The letter that had destroyed everything lay forgotten on his desk, its ink running from fallen tears. Rain hammered against the windshield as Nathan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. The wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge, but he couldn't stop searching. Every shadow along the road might be Hope. Every figure hunched against the storm made his heart leap, only to crash again when it wasn't her. "Come on, Hope," he whispered, peering through the murky darkness. "Where are you?" His cell phone lay on the passenger seat, silent despite the dozens of calls he'd made. The local hospitals had nothing. The shelters hadn't seen her. Even the police seemed indifferent when he'd reported her missing. "Sir, she's 18, the officer had said, his voice thick with boredom. "Legally an adult. Probably just another runaway." But they didn't know Hope. Didn't know how the temperature had dropped into the 40s. Didn't know she had nowhere else to go. Nathan pulled into another parking lot, this one belonging to a 24-hour diner. The neon sign buzzed weakly in the rain. Inside, tired-looking waitresses shook their heads when he showed them Hope's picture on his phone. One of the last photos he'd taken, Hope laughing in the greenhouse, soil on her cheek, life in her eyes. Back in the car, exhaustion clawed at him. He'd been driving for hours, making wider and wider circles from the mansion. The clock on his dashboard read 3:15 in the morning. His eyes burned, but he couldn't stop. Not while she was out there somewhere. His phone rang. Mrs. Givens again. "Nathan Warren, you need to come home," she said, her gruff voice softened with worry. "You can't keep driving around in circles. You're no good to her if you wrap your car around a tree." "I can't just sit there," he replied, his voice hoarse. "She's out there alone, Ruth. No money, no warm clothes. I know, dear." Mrs. Givens sighed. "But you need rest. Come home. We'll pray together." Prayer. Nathan almost laughed. When was the last time he'd truly prayed? Not since Lydia died. Not since he'd locked his faith away with everything else that hurt too much to touch. But he went. Home. What else could he do? The mansion loomed dark and empty, its windows staring out at the storm like accusatory eyes. Mrs. Givens waited in the kitchen with hot coffee and sympathy. Nathan couldn't stomach either. He wandered into his study, where Hope's letter still lay on the desk. Picking it up, he read it again, torturing himself with every word. Why hadn't he told her the truth from the beginning? Why had he waited until she found out like this? The second day brought no news. Nathan called old business contacts, offering rewards. He hired private investigators. He drove to Portland, Brunswick, even up to Augusta, showing her picture in every shelter and soup kitchen he could find. Nothing. The third day, his voice grew raspy from asking the same questions. His eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. Mrs. Givens force-fed him toast and tea, muttering about stubborn men and God's timing. That evening, Nathan found himself kneeling by the fireplace where he and Hope had shared so many quiet moments. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, reminiscent of the life she'd brought to this tomb of a house. "God," he whispered, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "Please, bring her back." His voice cracked. "I know I haven't talked to you in 30 years. I know I turned my back when Lydia died. But please, don't punish Hope for my mistakes. She's all I have left." The fire crackled. Outside, the storm raged on. Nathan stayed there, on his knees, until dawn painted the sky in shades of grey. On the morning of the fourth day, Nathan sat at his desk, staring at the phone. Mrs. Givens had just brought him coffee he wouldn't drink when it rang. His hands shook as he answered. Nathan Warren speaking. "Mr. Warren?" A woman's voice, professional but kind. "This is Nurse Matthews from Maine Medical Center in Portland. We have a young woman here who matches the description in your missing persons report." Nathan's heart stopped. Is she alive?" "She's stable," the nurse replied. "She was brought in early this morning, collapsed near the Preble Street Resource Center. She's dehydrated and running a high fever, but she's responding to treatment. I'm on my way." Nathan was already moving, not bothering with his coat. "Please, tell her I'm coming. Tell her." But he couldn't finish. His throat closed around the words he should have said days ago. The drive to Portland was a blur. Rain still fell, but Nathan barely noticed. His mind raced with prayers he'd forgotten how to pray. promises he'd forgotten how to keep. Maine Medical Center rose before him, its windows glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. Nathan parked haphazardly, leaving his keys in the ignition. His shoes squeaked on the linoleum as he ran to the information desk, breathless and disheveled. "Hope Lawson?" He gasped. "I'm here for Hope Lawson." His heart pounded as he waited for an answer, every second an eternity. "Please," he thought, "please let her be alive. Please let me make this right." The receptionist typed on her computer, each click of the keyboard like thunder in Nathan's ears. Finally, she looked up and pointed toward the elevator. "4th floor, room 412. Nathan ran, taking the stairs 2 at a time, not waiting for the elevator. His lungs burned, but he couldn't slow down. Not now. Not when he was so close. He burst through the stairwell door onto the 4th floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The hallway stretched before him, numbered doors passing in a blur as he counted them down. 408. 410. 412. Nathan stopped, his hand on the door handle, heart thundering in his chest. Beyond this door was everything that mattered, everything he'd almost lost. He closed his eyes, offered one last, desperate prayer, and pushed the door open. The hospital room was dim, with only a small lamp casting soft shadows across the sterile walls. Hope lay motionless in the bed, her skin almost as white as the sheets beneath her. An IV drip steadily delivered fluids to her arm, and the quiet beeping of monitors marked each precious heartbeat. Nathan approached the bed slowly, his legs trembling. She looked so small, so fragile, nothing like the vibrant young woman who had brought his house back to life. Dark circles shadowed her closed eyes, and her lips were pale and cracked. He sank into the chair beside her bed, gently taking her cold hand in his. Her fingers were like ice. "Hope," he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I'm here now. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you everything. Please wake up." A doctor entered, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Warren, I'm Dr. Phillips." She checked Hope's vital signs before turning to Nathan. "She's suffering from exposure and severe dehydration, but we've got her on antibiotics for the fever. With rest and proper care, she should make a full recovery." Nathan nodded, not taking his eyes off Hope's face. "How long until she wakes up?" "It's hard to say. Her body needs time to heal. The best thing you can do is be here when she does wake up." After the doctor left, Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out Laura's letter. The paper was worn now, creased from being read and reread during his desperate search. In the quiet of the hospital room, he unfolded it carefully. "I should have shared this with you from the start," he said softly to Hope's sleeping form. "Maybe then you would understand." His voice trembled as he began to read. "Dear Nathan, if you're reading this, it means my daughter has somehow found her way to you. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, not after running away when Lydia died, not after abandoning my own child. But I'm sick now, and I won't live to make things right. Hope is all that's good in me. She has Lydia's spirit, though she'll never know it. I've watched her grow from afar, seeing my sister's light shine through her eyes. But I couldn't be the mother she deserved. My addictions were stronger than my love. I'm not asking you to take her in out of duty or obligation. I'm asking because I remember the man you were, the man who loved my sister with such pure devotion. That love is still inside you, Nathan. It's been sleeping all these years, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Hope needs someone to believe in her, to show her she's worthy of love. And you, Nathan, you need someone to remind you that life isn't meant to be lived alone in that glass castle of yours. This isn't about the past. It's not about making up for lost time or paying old debts. It's about two broken souls who could heal each other, if given the chance. Take care of my daughter, Nathan, not because you promised Lydia, but because your heart still knows how to love. With hope and regret, Laura. Nathan's voice broke on the last words. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at Hope's peaceful expression. You weren't sent to remind me of the past, he whispered, his voice trembling. You were sent to save my future. These past weeks, you've brought more life into my world than I've known in 30 years. A slight movement caught his attention. Hope's fingers twitched in his hand, and her eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, she opened her eyes. Nathan? Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm here, he said, squeezing her hand gently. I'm right here. Hope's eyes filled with tears as she tried to speak. I heard the letter. Shh, Nathan soothed, brushing hair from her forehead. Save your strength. I just need you to know. Taking you in wasn't an obligation. It was a gift I didn't deserve. Hope's lips trembled as tears slid down her cheeks. She reached for Nathan's hand with what little strength she had. Their fingers intertwined, and in that moment something profound passed between them. Understanding, forgiveness, love. Without planning it, Nathan began to hum softly. The melody was familiar, the same hymn that had echoed through his house weeks ago, the one that had first connected their past and present. Hope's voice, weak but clear, joined his. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. The ancient words filled the sterile hospital room with warmth, transforming it into a sacred space. As they sang together, their voices blending in harmony, Nathan felt decades of grief and loneliness begin to melt away. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. They finished the hymn and sat in peaceful silence, hands still clasped. Hope's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but she fought to keep them open. Rest now, Nathan said gently. I'll be here when you wake up, I promise. Hope's lips curved in a small smile as she drifted back to sleep. But this time, her hand stayed warm in his. Nathan settled back in his chair, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Outside, the storm had finally passed, and the first rays of dawn were breaking through the clouds. Through the window, he could see the ocean in the distance, its waters calm and clear. Like the sea after a storm, his heart felt washed clean, ready for whatever new day might bring. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the coastal highway as Nathan's car wound its way home from Portland. Hope sat quietly in the passenger seat, still pale, but with color returning to her cheeks. She watched the familiar coastline through the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap over the hospital discharge papers. Are you comfortable? Nathan asked, glancing at her. We can stop if you need to rest. Hope shook her head, offering a small smile. I'm okay, just ready to be home. She paused, the word hanging in the air between them. I mean, back to the mansion. It is your home, Nathan said firmly, for as long as you want it to be. The rest of the drive passed in comfortable silence, broken only by the gentle classical music playing through the car's speakers. As they rounded the final curve, the glass mansion came into view, perched proudly on its cliff above the churning Atlantic. But something was different. Splashes of color dotted the usually austere landscape. Flowers, dozens of bouquets lined the driveway, their bright petals dancing in the breeze. What's all this? Hope breathed, pressing her hand against the window. Nathan smiled mysteriously as he pulled up to the front door. Seems the staff had some plans of their own. Before he could help her out, the massive front door swung open. Mrs. Givens stood there, her usually stern face softened with emotion. She hurried down the steps as fast as her sturdy frame would allow. "You foolish, wonderful girl," she called out, her voice rough with feeling. "Don't you ever scare us like that again." Hope had barely steadied herself on her feet when Mrs. Givens enveloped her in a fierce hug. The older woman's arms were strong and warm, smelling of fresh bread and lavender. Hope buried her face in Mrs. Givens' shoulder, tears springing to her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Hush now," Mrs. Givens said, pulling back to cup Hope's face in her weathered hands. "You're home. That's all that matters." Nathan watched the exchange with a full heart, gathering Hope's small bag from the car. The entrance hall had been transformed. Vases of roses, lilies, and wild flowers covered every surface. Soft music played from hidden speakers, and the usual austere atmosphere had given way to something warmer, more alive. "The whole staff pitched in," Mrs. Givens explained, noting Hope's wonder. "Even that grumpy old gardener, Mr. Peters, though he'll deny it if you ask him." Hope touched a pale pink rose petal, her fingers trembling slightly. "It's beautiful, but you didn't have to." "Yes, we did," Mrs. Givens interrupted firmly. "Now upstairs with you. Doctor's orders say rest, and I've got chicken soup simmering in the kitchen." Later that afternoon, Hope made her way carefully down to Nathan's study. She found him at his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied some papers. He looked up when she entered, immediately setting his work aside. "Should you be up?" he asked, concerned. Hope settled into one of the leather chairs across from him. "I've been in bed for days. Besides, I needed to talk to you." Nathan waited patiently as she gathered her thoughts. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm sorry I doubted your motives. When I found that letter, I was scared. Scared that everything, all of this, was just because of some promise you made years ago." "Hope," Nathan started, but she held up her hand. "Please, let me finish. I've spent my whole life feeling like a burden, like something to be dealt with, passed along. When I came here that night, you were the first person who just helped. No questions, no conditions. You gave me a chance to be more than my past." She took a deep breath. I should have trusted that was real. Nathan rose from his desk and came around to sit in the chair beside her. "I should have told you about the letter sooner. About your mother. About Lydia. All of it. I was afraid too. Afraid that knowing the whole truth would make you feel exactly as you did. Like an obligation." He reached for her hand, his grip warm and secure. "But you've never been that, Hope. You woke something in me I thought had died with Lydia. You made this house feel like a home again. The letter didn't make me care about you. You did that all on your own." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Finally, Nathan cleared his throat. "Actually, I have something to show you." He returned to his desk and pulled out a large roll of papers. Spreading them carefully on the coffee table, he revealed detailed architectural drawings. "What is this?" Hope asked, leaning forward to study the blueprints. "Something I've been working on since you arrived." Nathan explained. "It's a community home for runaway youth. 3 stories, 20 bedrooms, communal spaces, counseling offices, education facilities. Everything young people need to get back on their feet." Hope's fingers traced the careful lines of the drawing. "It's amazing." "I want to call it the House of Hope," Nathan said softly, almost shyly. "If that's okay with you." Hope looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "Really? Really? You showed me that sometimes people just need a chance, a safe place to land, someone to believe in them. I want to give that chance to others." "Then let's build it together," Hope said, her voice thick with emotion but full of determination. That evening, Mrs. Givens outdid herself with dinner. The formal dining room glowed with candlelight, the table set with Nathan's best china. Hope had changed into a soft blue dress that brought out the color in her cheeks, and even Nathan had traded his usual somber attire for a light sweater. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the company. Hope told stories about her first impressions of the mansion, making them laugh with her description of Mrs. Givens' initial suspicion. Nathan shared memories of learning to cook from his mother, including a disastrous attempt at Christmas cookies that nearly burned down their kitchen. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by soft laughter and comfortable silences. Through the windows, they could see the stars beginning to appear over the ocean, their light reflecting off the glass walls like thousands of tiny candles. As Mrs. Givens served dessert, her famous apple pie, Hope caught Nathan's eye across the table. The gratitude and affection in her gaze made his heart swell. Later that night, after Hope had gone up to bed, Nathan stood at his bedroom window. The moon cast a silver path across the waves, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers through the house. For the first time in 30 years, the mansion felt truly alive. As he prepared for bed, Nathan realized something profound. The photograph of Lydia on his nightstand no longer brought pain. Instead, he could almost imagine her smile, approving of the changes in the house she had once hoped to make a home. He slipped beneath the covers, listening to the distant sound of waves against the cliffs. His mind, usually so full of regrets and might-have-beens, was quiet. Instead of ghosts, he thought of blueprints and building plans, of young lives that could be changed, of the family he had found in the most unexpected way. For the first time in decades, Nathan Warren slept peacefully, his dreams full not of what he had lost, but of all that was yet to begin. The seasons turned like pages in a book, each one bringing new life to Nathan Warren's clifftop property. Winter melted into spring, and spring blossomed into a summer filled with purpose and possibility. The constant sound of construction equipment became a symphony of progress as workers laid the foundation for the House of Hope beside the glass mansion. Hope Lawson stood at the site one warm June morning, her hair caught in the salt breeze, watching as the framework rose against the blue Maine sky. She held a thick folder of design plans close to her chest, her own contribution to the project that had become their shared mission. "What do you think about making the girls' rooms yellow?" she asked Nathan, who stood beside her in his usual pressed shirt, though he'd long since abandoned his formal suits for more practical attire. "Like sunshine?" Nathan smiled, the expression now coming easily to his face. "I think that's perfect. Cheerful without being overwhelming." The rooms Hope designed were carefully thought out, each detail considered through the lens of her own experience. She insisted on large windows to let in natural light, remembering too many dark places in her past. Every bedroom would have its own reading nook, a small sanctuary for quiet moments. The common areas featured comfortable couches arranged in circles to encourage conversation and connection. "We should add more bookshelves here," Hope suggested, pointing to the blueprints spread across Nathan's study desk one evening. "Books saved me when I was younger. They helped me imagine a different life." Nathan nodded, making notes in his precise handwriting. His business acumen proved invaluable as they navigated the complex world of permits, regulations, and funding. He established a charitable foundation to support the home's operation, ensuring its future beyond their lifetimes. The townspeople's attitudes shifted gradually, like tide patterns changing with the moon. The suspicious whispers faded, replaced by genuine interest and offers of help. Local businesses donated supplies for the construction. The high school's woodshop class built custom furniture for the common rooms. Even Mrs. Peterson, who ran the downtown bakery and had once been among the loudest critics, began sending fresh bread and pastries to the construction workers. Reporters returned to the mansion, but this time they came with different questions. Nathan, who had once hidden from their cameras, now stood proudly beside Hope as they explained their vision. The Portland Press-Herald ran a full-page story titled "Reclusive Billionaire Builds Refuge for Youth," complete with photographs of the construction progress and quotes from local supporters. "What made you decide to build this home?" a young reporter asked during one interview. Nathan glanced at Hope before answering. "Sometimes grace appears at your doorstep in the middle of a storm. You just have to be brave enough to open the door." Between supervising construction and handling media inquiries, Hope began pursuing her own dreams. She enrolled in online nursing courses, setting up a small study area in the greenhouse they had restored together. Late at night, Nathan would often find her there, surrounded by textbooks and nursing manuals, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her laptop screen. "The anatomy lessons are the hardest," she confided one evening over their regular dinner. "But when I think about being able to help someone who's hurt or scared, it makes all the studying worth it." Nathan watched her with quiet pride. "You'll be an excellent nurse. You already have the most important qualification, a caring heart." Their evening meals had become a cherished routine. Sometimes they ate in the formal dining room, other times they shared simple sandwiches in the greenhouse among the blooming flowers. They talked about everything: Hope's classes, the construction progress, memories both painful and precious. Lydia's name no longer brought shadows to Nathan's eyes. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the ocean gold, Hope asked about her aunt's favorite flowers. "Lilies," Nathan replied, smiling at the memory. "White ones. She said they reminded her of pure things. Could we plant some in the garden at the new house?" Hope asked carefully. "I think she would like that very much," Nathan said, his voice steady and warm. Mrs. Givens, who had watched the mansion's transformation with maternal satisfaction, often joined them for Sunday dinners. She had become Hope's unofficial study partner, quizzing her on medical terminology while they prepared meals together. "That girl's got healing in her hands," Mrs. Givens told Nathan one morning as they watched Hope tending to the greenhouse plants. "Just like her aunt did." The construction progressed steadily through the summer months. By August, the building's exterior was complete, a warm, welcoming structure of brick and large windows that complemented rather than competed with Nathan's glass mansion. The interior work continued at a careful pace, each room thoughtfully prepared for its future occupants. Hope spent hours selecting furniture and decorations, determined to create spaces that felt like home rather than institution. She chose comfortable beds with colorful quilts, sturdy desks for studying, and soft rugs that made bare feet feel welcome. Each room had a bulletin board for personal photos and artwork, and a small bookshelf waiting to be filled. "Everyone needs a place to put their treasures," she explained to Nathan as they toured the nearly finished rooms, "even if they don't have many yet." The project attracted attention from other communities interested in creating similar programs. Nathan found himself fielding calls from charitable organizations and fellow business people, sharing their model and offering guidance. Hope's natural warmth and genuine empathy made her an excellent spokesperson for their cause, especially when speaking to potential donors. "She has a way of making people understand why this matters," Nathan remarked to Mrs. Givens after one particularly successful fundraising event. "She speaks from her heart, and people listen." Between her studies and her work on the home, Hope's own transformation was evident. The uncertain girl who had arrived at Nathan's door in a storm had grown into a confident young woman with clear purpose. Her nursing courses challenged her, but she approached them with determination, often studying late into the night. Nathan supported her educational pursuits wholeheartedly, converting one of the mansion's unused rooms into a dedicated study space equipped with everything she needed. He even arranged for tutoring when she struggled with particularly difficult subjects. "You don't have to do all this," Hope protested when he presented her with a new laptop for her coursework. "I want to," Nathan replied simply. "You're investing in others' futures. Let me invest in yours." Their quiet evenings together became anchors in their busy days. Sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence, Hope with her textbooks, Nathan with his business documents. Other times they would talk for hours about their hopes for the home and its future residents. The peace that had settled over them extended even to discussions of the past. One evening, Hope found an old photo album and asked about her mother and aunt as children. Nathan shared stories of the twin sisters' youth, tales Laura had told Lydia, who had then shared them with him. "They were inseparable as girls," he said, showing Hope a faded photograph of two identical young women in summer dresses. "Your mother's smile was just a bit different, see? A little more mischievous." Hope traced her finger over her mother's face. "Do you think she ever regretted leaving?" "I think she regretted leaving you," Nathan answered honestly. "But sometimes people get lost in their own darkness. That's why places like this are so important." As autumn approached, bringing crisp air and turning leaves, the House of Hope neared completion. Hope and Nathan walked through the finished rooms together, their footsteps echoing on new floors, their voices soft with anticipation. "It's really happening," Hope whispered, standing in what would soon be the home's library. "We're really going to help people." Nathan squeezed her shoulder gently. "We already have." The November wind whipped against the glass walls of the mansion, creating an ethereal symphony of whistles and moans. Inside, the warmth of the crackling fireplace wrapped around Nathan and Hope like a protective blanket as they sat in their usual evening spots. Nathan in his leather armchair, Hope curled up on the sofa with her nursing textbook set aside. 1 year. Hope mused, cupping her hot chocolate with both hands. "It feels like yesterday and forever ago at the same time." Nathan nodded, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "That storm was just like this one." He took a slow sip from his mug, the rich aroma of chocolate filling the air. "The House of Hope opens next week. Seems fitting, doesn't it?" "Mrs. Given says it's divine timing." Hope replied with a soft laugh. She had grown so much in the past year, stronger, more confident, yet still maintaining that gentle spirit that had first touched Nathan's heart. A particularly strong gust rattled the windows, making them both look up. Nathan glanced toward the heavy wooden door, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Strange," he said, his voice quiet. "I almost expect someone to knock." Hope giggled, tucking her feet under her, like some sort of anniversary replay. They shared an amused look, their laughter filling the warm space between them, but their mirth froze in their throats as a sound cut through the storm's fury. 3 faint knocks, barely audible above the wind. Nathan and Hope stared at each other, their expressions mirroring mutual disbelief. The knocking came again, slightly louder this time. "Did you—" Hope whispered. Nathan was already rising from his chair, moving toward the door with purpose in his stride. Hope set down her mug and followed, her heart pounding, with an odd mixture of déjà vu and anticipation. When Nathan pulled open the heavy door, the wind rushed in, carrying with it a few swirling snowflakes. There, illuminated by the porch light, stood a teenage boy. He couldn't have been more than 15 years old, his thin jacket offering little protection against the brutal coastal weather. His dark hair was dusted with snow, and his eyes held that same lost, frightened look, Hope had worn exactly 1 year ago. Without hesitation, Nathan shrugged off his warm cardigan and wrapped it around the shivering boy's shoulders. The gesture was so natural, so paternal, that Hope felt tears prick at her eyes. "Come in," Nathan said warmly, his voice carrying all the certainty and compassion of a man who had learned to trust in second chances. The boy hesitated for just a moment, looking between Nathan and Hope with uncertainty. Hope stepped forward, meeting his gaze with a gentle smile that carried understanding only someone who had stood in his shoes could offer. "You're safe now," she said softly, and watched as relief flooded the boy's tired eyes. The early morning mist rolled off the Atlantic, wrapping the cliffs in a gentle embrace. The mansion, once a monument to grief, now stood transformed. Where silence had reigned for 3 decades, children's laughter echoed through the halls and spilled out onto the manicured lawns of the House of Hope. Through the glass walls, glimpses of life danced everywhere. Teenagers gathered around the breakfast table, volunteers arranging fresh flowers, and Mrs. Givens bustling about with her signature morning muffins. The sterile emptiness that had defined Nathan's existence for 30 years had given way to something beautiful and alive. Nathan Warren stood at his favorite spot on the cliff's edge, hands in his pockets, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. The rising sun painted the sky in strokes of pink and gold, reminiscent of hope itself breaking through darkness. His silver hair ruffled in the breeze, and for once the solitude felt peaceful rather than painful. The soft crunch of footsteps on gravel announced Hope's arrival. She approached with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, her presence as natural as the sunrise itself. Wearing one of Mrs. Givens' old cardigans and her hair loose in the wind, she handed Nathan his cup. Black, no sugar, just as he liked it. "I thought I'd find you here," she said softly, standing beside him. Below them, the waves continued their eternal dance with the shore, a rhythm as old as time itself. Nathan took a grateful sip of his coffee, letting the warmth spread through his chest. The morning air was crisp with early autumn, carrying the salt-sweet scent of the ocean. In the distance, seabirds wheeled and called, their cries mingling with the sounds of children waking in the house behind them. "Funny," Hope mused, her eyes on the horizon. "How God answers prayers we didn't even know we said." She cradled her own mug, close, steam curling around her face like a veil. Nathan smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he looked toward the brightening horizon. The weight of loneliness that had burdened him for so many years had lifted, replaced by something lighter, something like joy. "He always does," he replied thoughtfully, "just not the way we expect." The morning light spilled across the ocean like liquid gold, illuminating everything it touched. Behind them, the mansion stood proud against the sky, its glass walls reflecting the sunrise in 1,000 brilliant facets. Through the windows, movement could be seen as the day began in earnest. Young lives starting fresh, broken hearts healing, new stories being written. The house that had once been Nathan's fortress of solitude now pulsed with life and purpose. Every room held laughter, every corner sheltered hope. The gardens bloomed with flowers planted by healing hands, and the greenhouse thrived with vegetables that would feed hungry bodies and nourish wounded souls. What had started as one act of kindness on a stormy night had grown into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. The virgin billionaire who had lived alone for 30 years had finally discovered that family wasn't something you found. It was something you built, one heart at a time. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.